I'm the editor-in-chief of People Matters, and you will see, actually while I'm talking, that you can see my colleague's name actually showing because we have some technical glitch. So, but I'm still, glad to be here with all of you who are joining. I think people are still joining in, but it's already 11 o'clock, so we're ready to go. This is a very special day, I think, for us at People Matters. We're launching the first webinar of the talent acquisition community, and I would like to thank Naveen Narayan for accepting this special invite to lead today's webinar, and I will be introducing him a little later on. Before we move forward, I want to give you a little brief about the Talent Acquisition League. We launched this community of practitioners, leaders in the recruitment space in the beginning of June in Gurgaon, and some of you would have been part of that event. The whole endeavor of this community is to really take the recruitment community forward. I think there's a lot of innovation which is happening in the recruitment function across India. There are a lot of best practices and a lot of learning that can be exchanged and synergized between each one of you. So this community is creating a platform to be able to share and learn from each other, and also bring experts from across the world to give us a context of what's next in the recruitment space. I would like to thank as well our partners. When we designed this community, it was very, very important for us to choose thought leaders in the space of recruitment. I would like to thank SHL India for being our principal partner. They are an inspiration for us because they have access to fabulous technology and best practices when it comes to talent management solutions. For some of you who were there in our event, there was a fantastic presentation as well of different techniques of assessments. So I would want and encourage all of you to log into shl.com for more information about SHL. I would also like to thank PeopleStrong. PeopleStrong is our knowledge partner in RPO, a leading outsourcing company. Most of you, of course, would have known about them: HR shared services, recruitment, payroll compliance, and HR technology solutions. So I'll also encourage you to log into their website, peoplestrong.com, for more information. Great, so let's move to today's presenter. It's a privilege to introduce Naveen. He's the Global Head of Talent Acquisition at HCL Technologies. Obviously, he has really vast experience when it comes to both talent, culture, organization, and effectiveness. And he's a professional who some of you would have heard him in other events. He is somebody who is, always looking at the effectiveness of the HR intervention. So even today's presentation, if you see, both, it's not only about strategies, but it's also about effectiveness when it comes to technology and talent acquisition. So he'll be taking us through 4 or 5 main objectives for this next half an hour or so. One is, what is it, those practices that have made talent acquisition more effective today, from the contextual point of view. What is it, what has changed in our business that has really brought about this change? So contextualizing that. What are those effective tools that we're using today? What technologies are we talking about, both in terms of employer branding, engaging with candidates, and bringing the whole recruitment process in a much more effective manner? Obviously, he'll also share a lot of tips of how to harness social media. I think he's done tremendous work on that space. And a little bit of, we'll conclude with some best practices. We've also left ample amount of time for questions at the end. So feel free to keep sending the questions along, because what we will do at our end is try to maximize the time and compile questions while Naveen is also talking. Yeah. So over to you, Naveen. We look forward a very engaging presentation, and look forward to all your questions as well. Over to you, Naveen.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Esther, for those kind words. I hope you can hear me well. If you can't, just probably ping me so that I can do something about it. Firstly, it's a privilege to do this first session. It is a very interesting topic as well, because most of the times when you talk about talent acquisition, it's not something that you first talk about technology. So the way I would probably do this is, the first thing that you need to remember in the whole space is that we're not talking about just automation. but we are talking about the various possibilities that exist today in technology, which improves effectiveness of the overall function. And that basically means it improves the either your conversion ratios, or it improves better sourcing capabilities or a reach to the candidates. And there are various technologies at this point in time which actually help on this one. The presentation basically is for about 30 minutes. I'll go through the presentation at one go, and then subsequently we could probably speak about the, we can take some questions on it. So the key thing that is there before we get into technology is what are the various foundation work that needs to be done before we move into it. So the first question you need to ask yourself is, am I just automating a process? And if you are, probably you are really lowballing or not necessarily going after much better goals that can possibly exist. There are a few things that I believe are good foundations. The first thing that is there is some clear understanding of why you want to go after a particular technology. And the next slide actually has 3 or 4 case studies from different industries and how people have actually used technology for very different reasons. So I think it's important that you have existing metrics and a very clear understanding between you and the business and certain business goals, which clearly states that this is what we are going to intervene with a particular technology. The second one, in my opinion, is process maturity. So don't try to automate a process which is not yet ready for technology intervention. So it's important that you first understand the process maturity. I mean, there are various models of process maturity that exist. Even if it's not a certification, I think it's important to have both at a design as well as at a delivery level process maturity, which is fairly high before you embark on putting it on a technology platform. Otherwise, you're probably going to be solving 2 problems, which is a process that probably doesn't work and a technology that is probably not necessarily giving you the right returns. The third big one is some form of data warehouse. The power of technology comes in is when you combine a lot of data elements. So as much as we are today talking about, let's say, technology in the talent acquisition space, but I think it's important to probably see how these metrics will start tying up with talent management. So you may want to try and figure out as to how many hires actually made it to maybe succession programs, how many hires in 2 years made it to the top rankings within the firm in terms of performance. And unless you're able to do some of that data analysis on tap, it's not going to be necessarily very effective. So overall, in the vision, somewhere it helps if you understand how the whole data is going to sit. Is it going to sit in one place? Are all talent management data going to sit in one place? The big other, of course, key thing that, in my experience, that I figured out, and my favorite saying that is there is that nobody likes change other than a baby with a wet diaper. Typically, when you go after and implement any form of technology, the first thing is of resistance. So a lot of effort goes in terms of trying to design and probably buy the right one and deploy it. But sometimes by the time we get there, we probably maybe just tired or overlook it. And change management is something that is really not focused very heavily, and change management for a period of time, because people are also changing within the teams, and it's just important that there is adequate effort in terms of that particular change. Looking at a couple of case studies in brief as to how certain companies have looked at technology, and this is just to try and see it from a smattering of various industries, and that's the reason why I kept saying that it is not just about automating a process. So, for example, there's a large technology product firm in the U.S. which had a very specific, clear agenda to say And it's in a very niche area, extremely niche area, probably just a few hundreds who are available in that skill. And they had a very clear goal to say that they had to improve their employee referrals. And more importantly, start tying up that data to some of the talent management and performance management metrics. They wanted a lot more clarity for the data to flow as people kind of joined into the talent management suite. A very large pharma and an FMCG firm, which actually did something very different, where they knew that their products, which is about a century old, many of their products, they wanted to leverage these products into the talent branding space. So they actually created certain forms of talent scouting programs where they invited people to start using some of their products. And they wanted to track as to how many the assumption that they made is if someone is going to start experimenting and using their products and start following their company through a product route, chances are maybe that person may be interested to work in the firm. Again, a very unique and a very different kind of an objective, something maybe we would never think about from just a normal process-centric framework. A large fast food firm, one of those big burger firms, if you can think of, which typically does high volume hiring, and they basically wanted something which would help them in multi-geography and manage hiring, especially of temp workforce and so on, for about 30,000 people. But most critically, in certain parts, to say, I want somebody to help in terms of screening or scheduling or tracking candidate preferences on which outlet they want to work in. So you're kind of getting a sense probably in terms of how sharply companies are defining why they want technology and where is it that they want to see impact. And most likely, if you go back to the first slide, most likely they're also having metrics to say before and after kind of metrics so that they are able to compare and confirm that that technology intervention is helping. Moving on, there are a few other exciting things happening in this space. So most of the times, again, when we think of technology, we probably either land up thinking maybe a few years back it would have been just an applicant tracking system. Of late, of course, the buzzword is more in terms of social media. We did speak about this. I mean, some of you who may have been there in the seminars, either in Delhi or in Bangalore, may have heard some parts of the whole buzz around the social media and what it does. The key part that is there within the first one, which I would speak about, which is on gamification, is it is more a technology which is prevalent with the existing, millennial generation of how people engage with certain, either with certain products or with certain firms. The most important part of gamification is that, again, on the background of it, it has a hypothesis. The hypothesis assumes certain forms of either consumer behavior or, in this case, talent behavior. And it tries to project it in the form of some engagement, social engagement, which you're doing on a peer-to-peer basis. So, for example, at this point in time, people are using, and we are also doing this in our firm, where we're using gamification for post-offer follow-up. We want to engage with candidates in the post-offer follow-up so that there is a far better conversion to join after they have signed up an offer. There are companies which are looking at gamification in the performance management space and employee communication space as well. One other thing that is also happening, which is not on the slide, is the use of artificial intelligence. So there are, again, products that are there in the marketplace which is using a lot of artificial intelligence for things like screening. So we are very much used to static flat form of keyword searches and so on. But if you go back and see the intelligent recruiter who kind of understands the job and who understands the CV, and he keeps looking at both of them and he says, maybe this will match. Technologies are currently looking at it in the same fashion. So they're not necessarily doing just a keyword, but they're also trying to read a JD and read a CV and then trying to match it with many many aspects within it. There are some companies which are also using it for deployment purposes as well. Most likely, probably a lot of your companies would probably be on the big three, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. It's very important that you probably have a strategy for all three. It's not necessarily, if you're just in one or two of them, you're clearly missing the potential of the combination of all three, because I think the way I see it is that Twitter is a great tool in terms of improving consideration. The reach is far better. Interestingly, between Facebook and Twitter, the interest generation and the number of applicants are far higher. Of course, conventional wisdom says that LinkedIn has a lot more relevant resumes maybe, or as much as a lot more serious candidates who are probably there for networking as much as opportunity. Right? Mobile is a big one. A lot of applicant tracking systems today directly connect to the mobile in terms of status updates. People have started using it for publishing their referral programs. You could refer candidates directly from a mobile into an applicant tracking system. And that's the power of trying to use it more as a delivery mechanism rather than missing out on that particular opportunity. Cloud, especially in terms of the various video conferencing infrastructure that may exist. Again, there are products that are available which actually help in terms of asynchronous interviews, especially in the Western markets where faking is not very prevalent. You will find that it's very critical that we also have asynchronous interviews that happens where videos, there are lots of clips of videos or interviews that are taken, and then an interviewer at a different point in time probably will go through it and assess it. Moving on, some interesting statistics for you at least from what some of the other companies are doing again within this space. The key part of any social media strategy is to stay relevant, is to stay very current, and more importantly is to probably have somebody who will engage in that particular informal tone. So the way I would read the first piece of statistic is all people who probably tie their mobile phones or other devices to their pajamas and then keep constantly probably checking various social media. It's very important that there is that informality that exists, and more importantly, a current status that exists. There are companies which are doing, for example, directly a hiring manager probably posts a video on the job. It's also a little bit of a woo strategy in terms of why that person needs to probably work with this particular project or with that particular business. There are people who are also doing things like the quick response codes, be it on business cards, be it on various other formats, so that it's again just a easy and more prevalent aspect of it. The point that we are kind of talking about is that so when you are thinking of technology, don't just think of it as the one applicant tracking system, but what else are you going to do overall? So I think the first starting point is what is the problem that you're trying to solve. Very clear metrics on the problems that you're trying to solve, getting a lot of process maturity before we jump into a technology, a lot of bolt-ons that need to be there, which could include the social media that is there probably from a sourcing perspective or from an engagement standpoint. There could be other bolt-ons that could be there, which is be it screening tools that exist, like I explained on artificial intelligence or video conferencing. So there needs to be, as much as you have an overall recruiting strategy, there needs to be a very clear view of that. There also needs to be a very clear technology roadmap that you will go to, and more importantly, what kind of problem that it continues to keep solving for you. Moving on. So, I mean, I think what we've probably figured out is that there are tons of technologies out there, and quite a few of them actually today have understood how to measure recruiting effectiveness, and this could be from things like source to hire ratio, this could be from things like conversions, or this could be time to hire, or engagement, candidate engagement that improves, talent branding that may improve. And each of those products that are there, or they could be a full-fledged, full suite ERP that kind of does this for you. The point is that most of the product firms have also understood how to tweak some of those outcomes. We do find, I think the key aspects of also working through with some of these technologies include the following, which is, let's say, starting from the collaborative wikis. We are in a time when the static applicant tracking systems have now moved to a lot more dynamic ways of working. So clearly what you also want to have is to invest in technologies that allow you a lot of change and that allow you a lot of configuration leverage over a period of time. There are technologies that are available which allow a lot of candidate interaction, and from there you probably also try to make changes in terms of, be it in terms of preferences or be it in terms of the overall process itself. It's very important, again, the whole alumni channel can be a lot more vastly tapped at this point. Like, for example, there is LinkedIn and a few others who are doing beta versions that are there, which is actually allowing people to look into the various networks that the individuals may have. So you may have 20, 30, 40,000 alumni over a period of time that you may have accumulated. And you could actually post jobs to all their network. You could actually interact directly with the network because you know the skill set and you know the typical groups that each of them are looking into. So what you're getting access to is not just an alumni joining in, but the alumni also probably referring, and from there onwards, people actually looking at their own networks and trees and branches that they have. Crowdsourcing is a key aspect, again, which you may want to use. So like the example that I said of the fast food chain that exists, people actually, in that particular applicant tracking system, the candidates and the line managers directly interact, and what they do is that they have, they agree their own scheduling, they agree preferences on where they will work. So the concept of a recruiter doing this as an activity kind of vanishes quite a bit. So the implication clearly for a recruiter in all of this is that if you're very activity focused and very intense on it, then clearly there are technologies that are going to replace it. And the more important part of it is also somewhere the word that I use is of democratizing some of these. So if you believe that all scheduling has to happen through recruiting, technology is challenging that particular notion today to say, why not a candidate directly talk to somebody who's going to interview, or the candidate can start seeing vacancies directly and say, I would like to work in this particular location rather than somewhere else. So the concept of crowdsourcing is basically, instead of becoming bottlenecks, it is a many-to-many kind of a model that starts interactions. What's also effective is in terms of how the entire leadership of the firm interacts, because we've seen that the overall employer branding and talent branding works a lot when there is a lot of senior leadership that participates a lot with the talent community. So I think gone are the days when a talent community probably will look at a billboard or just a story in some print media and then make up their mind to say how they would probably make their choices of consideration. So somewhere it is critical, as you're looking at some of these technologies, the peripherals that are there, And the peripherals here are, if you're engaging in social media, be ready where your leadership will engage on it, where they are willing to probably invest time and start talking to talent communities, because the talent community wants to ask questions to say, why should I join your firm? If you're not ready for it culturally as a firm, then maybe those are some of the parts to fix, because the easier part to fix is really the just the investment or creating a particular platform for interaction. So hopefully you're getting a sense of some of the things that needs to be done both. And I think in my view, the easier part of it is probably implementing the technology. The more difficult part of it is the trying to create the ecosystem around it, which is be it in terms of process or data or what kind of interaction models or things that you probably always held close and certainly may probably break in terms of convention. The key aspect also, for example, there's one experience that we had in terms of the whole ideation part of it or communities part of it. We all work with a lot of placement partners and various other networks that exist. Now, the key is in terms of, again, how close do you want to bring many of them into the overall process, because both candidates as well as networking, various network partners are very much interested to provide feedback. And we do live in a generation where people want to provide a lot of feedback and do have platforms to provide it, even if you don't probably give them access to that. So I think instead of them going and writing it in some random site, how is it that the organization is going to get ready where they are going to attract some of these networks, be it talent groups that you may hire in future or probably various partners? How is it that you're going to start capturing some of this and start reacting to some of this? So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavor of the change that you may probably need to institutionalize within the firm. So a quick recap, again, in a relative sense, I would say the easier parts are the process maturity bit or finding the right product. Maybe the parts that need to be, you need to invest a lot more thought is the overall technology roadmap, which is within a 1 to 2 year time space. How is it that you're going to build the overall technology roadmap? Again, the part that is easy is to build some of these interaction models. The more difficult part is to change the culture around the firm where maybe your CEO or HR head or a talent acquisition head directly interacts with talent groups, or business heads interact with talent groups, so that there is good talent branding that builds through. So that's the key that I would think you should also focus on as you're thinking about the technology piece. So it's not just about putting a system in place and hoping for some magic. Quite a few things that are happening within the whole toolbox that is there. So again, these are more in the emerging space. These are not necessarily yet fully relevant or extremely mature in its current implementation. But the speed at which technology is probably getting redundant, or the speed at which new technologies are emerging, I think it's very important to probably look at some of these emerging trends. So again, there are lots of new smart ATS that kind of is coming through, where we are also looking at large forms of data and large forms of the applicant tracking kind of merging, and you find a lot of data analytics that are coming through from there. So for example, there are tools that are available today in terms of providing predictive analysis on whether an individual will join or will not join. And those are some of the things that earlier used to be left to probably human judgment. Biometrics is again a very key thing, or certain algorithms that the person, as the person probably interacts with you, the system is making certain judgments to say whether the person will fit in or will not probably fit in. We did speak about video interviews But there are also options today available of people putting up video resumes or video job descriptions. We spoke a little bit about the whole asynchronous interviewing format, especially if you're doing interviews across time zones or if you're doing interviews at volume. You also have technologies which have a one-way video where maybe the interviewee is in front of a system and there are asynchronous questions that are coming through, and you're also trying to capture the person's reaction on the video. So it's a little bit of a combination of a telephone and a video, and all this typically running through the applicant tracking system itself. So these need not be just bolt-on systems, but otherwise as well. So those are some of the things that are emerging, and we did briefly speak about this. The whole part of doing this, and I'll go back to the first statement that I made, if you're just going to automate a process, I think it's really something that you should probably think through, because the opportunities that exist are far more superior than where it is at this point. So typically an applicant tracking system is able to help you on predictive modeling. It kind of tells you where the bottlenecks are, good applicant tracking systems, or if you've configured it in that fashion. It also kind of tells you various meaningful groupings that are there. So the whole data analytics suite that sits on top of it is a very critical part in terms of the applicant tracking system that you need to think through. And then the third part of it is really in terms of what is it that you're going to do with all of these analysis. So let me give you some examples. The analysis that could probably be there include, for example, people who are joining from certain regions within a particular, within, let's say, India, tend to stay much longer than probably somebody else. People of certain colleges maybe tend to stay much longer, or people of, and once you start doing a combination of all of these, 2 or 3 variables, then the predictive modeling also starts becoming a lot more useful for you. So you're also trying to start looking at which are the people that I'm hiring have a larger propensity to quit, or which are the people that I'm hiring a larger propensity to join. And that's what I mean by the whole predictive modeling bit, and it's important that the data that is coming out of talent acquisition technologies are getting used overall in the talent management space. So the key thing is that, interestingly, I was speaking to a few recruiters a few days back, and I think everybody who's probably focused on a very activity-intensive role where either you're probably doing lots of follow-up or you're probably doing lots of scheduling and so on and so forth, will obviously see some of these as a huge threat. People who see it as a very effective, it's going to make my day job very effective, or the organization sees it in the same fashion, will see a lot of these tool set improving the overall effectiveness of the function. So the key thing that is there is that, it does play an important role, and I think the key word is also it's just an enabler. It is not something that is going to completely take away the role of a recruiter, because the power of engagement of a recruiter, the intelligence that the recruiter has in terms of which talent pools to tap into, making some of those judgments, the power of convincing a candidate, or the business interactions that happen, probably can never be replaced. And that's maybe where the key lies, which is that the place that all the recruiting function needs to probably specialize or develop mastery. And I would think that's the space that all of us should probably focus on and leave the rest of it to the technology to do. So thank you very much. I'm going to pause here for a minute, and I'll take some questions, which will be moderated by, I think, Esther or Akansha.
Thank you, Naveen, and thank you for the wonderful session. This is Raj Lakshmi from People Matters. We have a few questions for you, Naveen. I'm happy to take you through them one by one. The first one is from Ambika Magoo. What HR automation, with HR automation becoming popular lately, how can SMS leverage SaaS-based talent acquisition software to its best?
SMS, you said, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. SMEs, sorry. I'm sorry. SMEs.
Okay.
So basically, with automation becoming popular, how can SMEs leverage SaaS-based talent acquisition softwares?
I'm assuming, SMEs here are the small and medium enterprises. I think it's a
Right.
good question if it is, with the SaaS coming through, I think the whole concept of the price barrier has dramatically changed, because a few years back, if you had to buy an applicant tracking system, you'd probably have to pay, vast sums of money. We also didn't have many India or APAC-based applicant tracking systems, which have again broken a lot of price barriers overall. But SaaS kind of allows you a lot more flexibility because of the basis of volumes that you're hiring, and it does not make a huge dent in terms of the investments that you're doing. So I would think that, with the big three like Connexa, Brastrings, or Taleo, Oracle, and many others moving to SaaS, success factors, and so on. Clearly, it is probably a space that hopefully a lot of SMEs will start investing into. In fact, I should have said that before. It is a great opportunity, I believe, for a lot of SMEs to look at their processes and improve their reach a lot more. The big advantage of SaaS also is that you get the leverage of a very mature product, which a lot of large firms are using. So technically, if you're an SME, you could also use Connexa, which probably someone like a Disney or a Walmart also uses, and you get the advantage of that product maturity as much as Disney or Walmart is also getting through.
Thank you, Naveen. Another question we have is, would you have any suggestions for using technology to help HR with reference checks?
Not that I have seen anything to do with reference checks, but I think it's becoming a little, I'll probably answer it a little differently, which is the traditional form of reference checks, which is you go to some of the individuals who the candidate refers to, may probably also have to change. And we were speaking about this, I think, in that conference a couple of weeks back that you referred to, where today, because lives are a lot more transparent, you actually go and, so for example, you could look up the person's, all the posts that he has put up, and probably make judgments on it. And the question that is there is again from a policy and an ethical perspective, is it right or is it wrong? And as an organization, you'll have to make that decision. So let's assume, for example, you go and look up the posts of a candidate who you have made an offer to, and then you find a lot of things that do not suit the culture of your organization, or just the culture of just normal civic society. What would you do? Would you withdraw the offer, or would you probably want to check again a little more? And I think those are the conundrums that will probably come through as we start wading into new ways of probably reference checks. So it's not necessarily technologies that are available, but I think the technologies that are existing at this point will throw a lot of challenges to you on how you're going to probably make any judgments on these. Another example is, let's say someone is extremely active on social media, has a large following, and probably good as well. And then you probably didn't make an offer to him, has a great influence in that community. Is that something that you would want to think about within that particular community? Let's say within a particular skill community that particular person may exist, finance or SAP or something else that is there. So I think the traditional forms of, let me call up 3 people that the person has asked me, and then the standard 5 questions I'm going to ask him, maybe probably completely irrelevant even today, if not a little bit in future.
Okay. There's another question from Pooja Saraya. Would it be possible to dwell more? I mean, she wants to know more about the importance of gamification in recruitment. If you could throw some light on that.
I think this is probably one place that will that's probably the biggest investment that I would personally want to keep my eyes on, which is considering that the ways in which, I mean, this particular gamification allows interaction with the organization, and it allows interaction with the peer group as well. So let me give an example. Like I said, that we are currently looking at a particular gamification model for post-offer follow-up. So technically what happens is that everybody who's accepted an offer, and since we do fairly large volumes on a daily, weekly basis, those individuals are all engaged on a particular platform, and they can interact on a peer-to-peer basis. So typically, like what you probably land up doing, a farm game on Facebook, and you start interacting with random strangers, and you probably even land up sharing information or playing games. That's really the format in which this happens. So as much as we are dishing out company information, but we are also kind of using some of the ways of how people today interact peer-to-peer, would like to trade information, and things like that. What we found is that people who engage a lot more in that particular application have a higher tendency to probably join us. And that's really the hypothesis behind on the analytics. And again, if you go back to if you go back to that consumer example that I gave you in the slides, the firm was also doing the same thing. The FMCG pharma firm was doing something similar, which is they wanted you to engage. They wanted you to engage in a very different fashion to see whether if you highly engage, chances are you may probably join us. And that's really the key. And we're also trying this, for example, with with employee communication and spaces like that, which is instead of a one-to-many kind of communication, gamification is allowing people to do a more self-discovery. It's a little more democratic, where you're not forced to attend some of these, but you can explore it at times that you can do it. You want to do this. And again, the same corollary exists, which is the more you engage, the more you're probably interested in it. And a lot of people who don't, we have found, at least in the employee communication side, are probably just fence sitters.
Okay. Naveen, there is also a request from Subir Verma, if you could to share some more insight and practices at HCL with respect to virtual tools or gamification and how it is used in your organization.
I briefly touched upon it in the previous question. So we are currently experimenting with two areas. But before we jumped onto it, the prior to that, we had to kind of do about a 2 to 3 month overall regression analysis on why people don't join after accepting an offer, who are create some hypothesis on various demographics as to the tendency of people who join or don't join. And that was put onto a particular tool. The tool works in a fashion where if you are a new joiner who's expected to join, let's say, on 1st August, you are introduced to that tool. You can log in at all points in time. It's a bit like, it's as easy as probably any other social site. You get to see a peer group who's going to join with you. There are people from HCL who are virtually available to you. And all information that you typically land up giving a potential new joinee is available. It is just that it's available in a more fun format. So, I mean, if you engage and if you play some quizzes, you get points. You can trade some of those points and say you will go to some other level. You can pose questions to your peer group, and anybody who kind of does a lot of engagement gets a lot more points. So you can kind of get a sense of what I'm saying. So the point that is there is that there are some individuals who kind of come in every day, probably play a little bit of this, and then we found that those are the individuals who really want to join. There are some probably who will never even log in. and at least the statistics show that those are probably the people who are the higher chances of them not joining us and probably reneging on the offer. So technically it is giving us two things. One is it's giving us a lot more predictability in terms of who will join and who will not join. And two is that for the people who will not join us, or at least we are making an inference from there, we have an ability of about 15-30 days to make certain interventions to see whether they will be engaged on it.
Okay. There's an interesting question. I mean, we all heard about how organizations are using LinkedIn to find the right candidate. So are there any key parameters to look for in a LinkedIn profile to really understand whether a particular candidate is a passive candidate or an active candidate? This has come from Unmesh Shukla.
I mean, I may not be the expert in terms of, because I think that's a little bit of more a sourcing question than a technology question that I would think. I can only tell you probably that if he happens to be a passive candidate, you're probably feeding a statistic which shows that 2/3 of the people who join from LinkedIn are passive candidates. So, but I'm not sure whether I'm the best person to answer that question.
Okay. Another one here is, with HR automation, do you think attracting talent will become more lucrative? This has come from Ashish Nahar.
I don't know what you mean by lucrative, but attracting talent is probably becoming either difficult or easy, depends on how you want to see it. I personally believe that it is a lot more easier to attract candidates because it's a lot more transparent. So, for example, I mean, in the, let's say, 5-10 years back, a lot of the conversation used to be through, let's say, print media. And you never knew in terms of how many people were interested, how many people, what is called as consideration score that is there, which is if you asked a random set of 100 people as to if somebody would change a job and which company would they pick yours? Would they pick yours as the top 3? Today it becomes a lot more easier. All you have to do is probably just go and ask a particular poll question. You can have hundreds and thousands, and some places many more people following you on things. So it becomes a lot more easier in terms of trying to improve consideration or attracting talent. The most important concept, I think, that Indian companies need to work a lot more, which I think Western companies work a lot more, is around talent scouting, which is having at the bank of people who follow you, and it's a lot more easier through social media today, engage them on a regular basis, and then subsequently at some point in time maybe you'll hire them, right? But it's very important to do that virtual talent pool, even if you're hiring small volumes or large volumes.
Okay. We have another question from Sarang Brahme. One of the biggest challenges in technology transformation is managing internal change, and recruiters or leaders normally oppose that. How do you suggest we approach this situation? And a similar question has actually come also from Natasha Singh. So I think you could, who says that how would you sensitize leadership towards this change? A, technology, and B, how do you look at TA as a strategic asset? I think you can answer probably both these questions. They are kind of related.
Sure. I think it's a good question because the way I was saying the story to a bunch of recruiters a couple of days back and saying that it's like having a baby, and you're very excited about it until the hard fact hits you maybe a couple of hours later, and then the whole change management hits you hard. Most of the times, organizations are not ready for that particular change because maybe the mistakes that were made probably way upstream. So if it is typically a decision of a for HR, by HR kind of a decision, you will find business is completely left out of the loop. So Again, it depends on what is the business reason why you are putting out this technology investment. So if you are able to go and tell your CEO or whoever is the business sponsor and get a business sponsor and engage them early on to say, by investing this, we are going to improve the following metrics, and there is a dollar value to it. The assumption is that the change management becomes a lot more easier because there is a what's in it for them early on. The second part of it is the first 30, 60 days after the technology is implemented, as much as there will be a lot of issues. Hand-holding and watching people and coaching people to move away from bad habits is very critical. I mean, simple examples, people will still download the whole report out of a tool, put it back onto Excel, do some stuff that they used to do earlier, and put it back more as a data feeding tool. And you want to kind of catch people at that point and say, let me help you do this differently. So unless you're able to catch them in that first 30, 60 days, which I believe is a golden period for change, again, it may not necessarily help, because the normal tendency is that I don't like it. And some of the things that people do, of course, are engage them during functional discussions, engage them during UATs, make them trainers, make them change agents, and various such things. So, I mean, any technology is not going to be easy to adopt, literally. So these are probably 2 or 3 things, if you did, may help.
Also, when you the social media also opens doors to all kinds of updates and information. So how do you deal with negative posts on blogs, social media? Is there a way that organizations can manage that effectively? This question is from Saikiran Kaluri.
I think it's an interesting question, because I don't know whether we've at least all of the firms have understood how to deal with it as yet. I think the conundrums are as follows, which is everybody knows that it exists, right? Be it cynicism or negativity or any of the negative feedback that may exist. But when it is in the open space, I don't know how to deal with it. Is also a conundrum that is there. 2 is in terms of do we have policies in the organization. So if there is something which is negative on the company side versus a public side, is there a policy which differentiates within it? Is there a policy which says, for example, would you intervene at some point, and the intervention could be warnings, could be many other such things, and does it mean that you will snoop, is also a big question mark. The other questions are in terms of would you react as well? So, for example, I mean, if a talent community is writing a lot of stuff, and there are, if you go to Glassdoor and various other places, all you have to do, and you'll find lots of them. Do you react? Is again a policy? And I think these are the new set of questions that a recruiting manager needs to ask himself or herself, and create some policies around it. And it really depends in terms of what is your appetite for all of these. Most companies don't react to negative posts. Most companies don't mind if somebody is probably writing a lot of bad stuff in public sites, as long as, it is not going way out of hand. But they obviously take a lot more stricter view if it is in some company-based site. So a lot of them have internal company sites. So that's what most companies land up doing. But I think it's an important debate within the organization on what are we tolerant towards and what are we not. And I think if you write through some of those guidelines, you will find that employees do respect or at least understand some of it.
Great. I think we have a lot of questions coming in, but given the time, we'll take one more question, which is important. And then maybe everyone who has more questions can keep them, send them to us, and we could try and take it offline. The one last question is, how do you really measure the ROI on this technology transformation and technology investment that happens as a result of this transformation?
Oh, it's very, you'll have to go back to that key question that is asked. Let's say a simple thing. Let's go back to those 3 or 4 examples and then maybe some examples that if I superimpose some of them that I have experiences on. For example, if I'm putting together a technology and it says that my fulfillment rate will improve because my reach will improve or my conversion will improve or time to fill will improve, clearly I have arrested a lot of lost revenue. So in an industry like mine, which is in the IT, not having the person on time means revenue losses, and probably for many other industries as well. So if I'm not able to provide the right number and within the time that is provided, so any investments where I'm saying that I'll be able to improve it from, let's say, 85% to 95%, and that 10% additional with the revenue that that particular person can generate is clearly the ROI in my view. It could be things like, for example, I want to improve referrals. I want to improve referrals from 15% to 40%. So again, the referral is not just because it is maybe a shade cheaper than some of the channels of hiring, but it is also because the referral conversions are much better. Referrals, typically, at least industry says that people tend to stay much longer, both the referrer and the referee. So you try to quantify some of these, and that's really the ROI that you're trying to impact, really. And then again, it depends on, go back to your business case. And the business case cannot be about, and I think the very short-term myopic view of a business case is if I put through an automation tool and 3 people from the team will go. I think that is the most myopic case that you will see. The best cases are the ones which says that these are the CEO kind of problems that we have in the overall talent acquisition space. And this is really where we'll either impact a little bit of maybe revenue, customer satisfaction, or profitability, or some other form of conversion. I'll probably just say one more comment, which is there's someone who had, Rajiv Mishra, who had said saying technology probably takes away personal touch and emotion. I'd probably say the reverse, which is with the current technologies that are there, and considering that a lot more people are more interested to engage on that, and to the point where probably even families are talking today on Twitter and SMS, even if they are under the same roof and sitting next to each other. Actually, it is. That is the new personal touch today. So, if you actively have a large social space as well as two-way candidate interaction space, in my view, that is the new personal touch. Back to you, Raji.
Thank you, Naveen, and thank you for a great, insight sharing today. I'm sure we all have gained a lot. So I'm sure a lot of you will have many more questions. I would request you all, if you're on Twitter, then tweet it with the hashtag TA League, and we'll try and get our presenter for the day answer those for you. Or alternatively, email us the questions, and we'll see how best we can get them answered as soon as possible. And I thank all the participants today for making the launch webinar of the TA Leadership League a great success, and we've had great participation, and we look forward to your continued participation, through the year with the many activities that we have planned. For those of you who are not aware, we have many events across cities organized in Bangalore, Bombay, Delhi, and webinars every alternate month. So the next webinar we will be in touch with you for is on 8th August, and we will soon get back to you with the communication and details, etc. Keep communicating with us, be in touch with us, because this is a community for the talent acquisition professionals. So it is any feedback, any suggestions on what topics we should cover in the future, please feel free to drop us a line. And with this, I thank you, Naveen, for a great start to these webinar series. And I also thank SHL and People Strong for being partners in this complete year-long program. Thank you all, and you all have a good day ahead.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.